Bots, they can be good, but they can also be bad. When you've got a user registration form, you want humans submitting form data, not robots by accident submitting junk data. So how can you stop that from happening? You can use Google reCAPTCHA. This video looks at how to add it both on the client side in React, but also on the server side. And the way it works is in the client, you get access to this token. You send the token to the backend, and then Google lets us know whether it's a success or not. Basically, whether it's a bot or a human. And then we can use that to decide whether we want to save the data that's being submitted to our backend or not. So to get started, this is the form we're working with. I admit it's not very pretty, but it does the trick. It asks for the name of the user, the email, the password, and they have to agree to our terms. So we're going to be adding reCAPTCHA to this in React. So my previous video showed how to build this form using React hook form. We're going to sort of be adding on to that, but this video is all about how to use reCAPTCHA. So just to give you an overview of what we're working with, let's get out of our tests. So this component here, home, that's the home page of this Next.js application, has a form with client-side validation. It submits it to the server here, and the server basically responds with success or failure. So what we'll be adding is basically in around here, we'll be adding in reCAPTCHA on the client. We'll submit that token to the server, and then we'll go into the server side and verify whether it's a real human or a robot. So the first thing you need to do when you're dealing with reCAPTCHA is register a new site. I've already gone into the reCAPTCHA admin, clicked register a new site. And the first thing you're faced with is, do you want v3 or v2? You may think, v3, it's better than v2 because it's one version more advanced. But they sort of do different things. v3 gives you a score between 0 and 1 of basically how likely it's a human or not. Whereas v2 is the one that pops up an image and it says like, click all of the fire hydrants or whatnot. And you have to choose which one works the best for your app. The problem with v3 sometimes is there's no user interaction where they get to interact. So sometimes a real user gets a score of like 0.3 and you have to force them through like a two-factor authentication. So it's not always the best way to go, but we're going to be using v2, which is still the most popular approach. So in v2, you can either have where they have to check a checkbox, or you can do the invisible badge, which we'll be doing, which is actually fairly similar to v3, except it doesn't give us a score, it just gives us a true or false. You have to add in your domain that you're doing it on, agree to the terms, and then you can submit. So what this gives you is a site key, this is the public one, and then a secret key, which is what you use on the backend. Because we're working in Next.js, when you're developing locally, you can put your environment variables in this .env.local. So I already had a previous one I was playing with. Why don't I update it with the new one? I'd like to take a minute to talk about AppSignal, who has partnered with me on this video. I was excited to partner with them because I've used them professionally on multiple websites, and what it is an all-in-one monitoring tool that gives you detailed insight into what your users are actually experiencing. Are they encountering errors either in the browser, in your React code, or on the server, in your Node or your Ruby code? Are there any performance issues that are sort of slowing down your API? Is it database calls? Is it external APIs? What's actually making things slow? How are your servers doing? Are they almost out of memory? Is their disk filling up, etc.? But then you can take all of this information and customize it into different dashboards, change the time frame that you're looking at, and then set up anomalies. So say you have an endpoint that typically responds in 200 milliseconds. If it suddenly bumps up to 2 seconds, you get notified via email or Slack or whatever you set up. So thanks to AppSignal, head on over to their website at appsignal.com and you can try them out for 1 month for free. And if you use the code LEIGH, that's Lee, you get 10% off for the full year. Thank you. Paste this in here. So there's one thing I wanted to point out that's sort of Next.js specific. If you want your token visible in the client, you add a next_public_ ahead of it. If you want it to remain a secret on the server only, you leave that off and it won't, via Webpack, expose this key on the server. Because if you had your secret key visible, it's not so secret anymore, is it? So with that in place, let's go to the terminal, reboot our Next.js app so that it picks up the changes to the environment variables. And then we can go in and start adding in the React code. So I have already imported reCAPTCHA from the React Google reCAPTCHA package. And what we need to do now is go, it doesn't matter where, somewhere inside of our component. I'll put it maybe above my server errors. So we'll do this like this. So it's telling us that there's an issue and we have to pass it a few props for it to work correctly. So the first one is the site key. And because we put that into an environment variable, we can access that via process.env and then the name of the environment variable. So we'll just go and copy that. The next thing we need to do is basically tell it that we want to use the invisible one versus the click a checkbox one. And we do that strangely by saying the size is invisible. And when you're dealing with invisible, you have to sort of programmatically tell it to execute so that you have the code. And in order to be able to do that, you need access to a ref to get to this. So we'll define a ref as re-ref, the reCAPTCHA ref, that we need to go up here and define. So we pop up here, and now we can say the re-ref is equal to use ref, just like that. So now we have access to it. I think we can even define the types here, which is sort of cool. We can say what type of ref is it going to be. It's going to be a ref to the reCAPTCHA. And now we have access to the ref. When do we actually use it? So when we'd want to use it is when the form is prior to the form being submitted to the server. So what we can do is we can say prior to posting data to the server, we want to get access to the token that this reCAPTCHA thing gives us. So const token is await re-ref dot current dot, and it is called execute async, just like this. So with the token in hand, which is nicely working with TypeScript, it's a string. We can basically pass this token up to the server. So we'll just come down here and pass this. If we want to take a look at it, just to make sure that it's working, so let's just say token like that. We'll go to our application. And if things are working, you should see this little protected by reCAPTCHA showing up here now. And if we fill in the information, so Lee, email@email.com, password, and agree to terms. So what did I not do? There we go. So here is the token that we want to submit to the server. As we're playing around, I don't want to have to fill out this form data every time. So I'm just going to come back up here and say the default values for the form are Lee, email is email@email.com. The password is word. I've got some validations that it has to have upper, lower, number, special character, and be more than 8 long. So I was just making sure of that. And the terms are already agreed to. So now I can refresh the page and I don't have to fill this out every time. And I still have access to the token. So one thing, say there's an error on the server and you want to resubmit this. If you just click submit again, see how it's sort of like stuck in this submitting state? So after every reCAPTCHA, sorry, that was a mouthful, you have to reset the reCAPTCHA so that it's ready for a subsequent check again. And the way you do that is you say re-ref.current.reset. So by calling reset, it allows you to execute the reCAPTCHA check a subsequent time if the data, say, was incorrect on the server. And that's all there is to the client-side aspect of this. So now if we hop over to the server, I'm in Next.js, so I'm inside of the API folder and auth endpoint. And inside of my sort of request response handler here, I'm given the request, which I've already declared that the body will be receiving a token of value string. So what I want to do now is define a function that basically takes this token, sends it off to Google. Google responds back with whether it was a success or not. So I am going to define this function here, and we'll say it's an async function called validate human that will receive the token. So token will be a string, and it will respond with a Boolean of whether that's a human or not. Did I do this right? Function validate human Boolean is not, oh, right. Because it's async, I need to wrap this inside of a promise, and hopefully that will work. A function, okay, so it's just missing a return statement now, I think. True. There we go. So the first thing I want to do is post this data to Google, but in order to do that, you need that secret reCAPTCHA key that we've defined here. So let's just put this inside of a variable called secret process.env.that. And now we can make a fetch call to the Google endpoint. So we will await the response, fetch, and we've got the URL. It's a little bit of a mouthful to type out. It's https://google.com/reCAPTCHA/API/site verify. And you need to pass up this secret plus the token. So because I'm going to be embedding variables, we'll switch to backticks. And now I can say that the secret is equal to secret. And so the way you pass the token up, it's not token, even though that seems to make the most sense. It's actually the response. And what they mean by that, it's the sort of human check response that was done on the client that results in this token here. So that's the response that we're passing up. So fetch on its own would want to do a GET request. We want to do an HTTP post. So we'll have to add in that the method is post. And that should set us up good to go. So we want to convert the response into some data. So we'll say data is await response.json. And why don't we just console.log what Google's sending back to us, and we'll pretend that it's a human by returning true. Actually, why don't we pretend it's a bot, but we'll console.log the data. Data, reCAPTCHA data. Cool. So we haven't called this function yet. And I want to call it prior to trying to save the data and checking if the email already exists and all of that stuff. Because if it's not a human, I don't even want to continue. Because sometimes a bot would be submitting emails to check if it gets an error back of whether the email exists in your database or not. And they may be trying to harvest and find out what users you have in order to use leaked passwords to try and gain access to your account. Hopefully this will block that because we won't allow bots to be submitting data to our form. So we will say if not, actually why don't we put it into a variable? If human, we will await validate human passing the token. So if it's not a human, we want to respond with a status of 400, which means an error, and user input error. And we want to respond with some JSON that includes an array of errors. And the error that it will contain is, please, you're not fooling us, bot. Perfect. And we don't need to continue going after this. So we're just going to do an early return from this function so that it doesn't keep checking here and responding with success, etc. So with this in place, why don't we check to see whether it's working or not? So I'm going to refresh, send this over, and great, please, you're not fooling us, bot. And why don't we check to see what Google responded on our backend check? So because all of that code happened on the back end, we need to go into the terminal here, and we can see that the reCAPTCHA data is actually success true. So it thinks I'm a human, which is good because I'm pretty sure I am. So we just need to access this and return it rather than a hard-coded false value. So we can do that by coming here and say return data.success. And we can get rid of our console.log. And with this in place, we hopefully have our backend validate human check working. Go back here, let's refresh. We'll submit this form and we get the success message. So what that meant is basically client-side validation says good to go. Submits it to the backend with the token from reCAPTCHA. Google says human, good to go. And then we had a subsequent validation check. This is where you would check your database and perform some backend validation as well. That one also said good to go. There's no errors. And because of that, we responded with success. So this is where you may redirect them back to the home page, hopefully with like an authenticated token or cookie or something like that. But that's beyond the scope of this video. So what we've done is we've gone from nothing at all. We've registered a reCAPTCHA key, v2 invisible one. We've come over into React. We've added in the reCAPTCHA component, setting the correct key, which reCAPTCHA method we're using, the ref, so that during the onSubmit event, we could grab a token, reset it for subsequent submissions, send that token back to the backend, to the server. The server receives this token, passes it to the validate human function, where we send the token along with our secret key to Google. They give us a response back, which is either success or not. And a success of true is basically that it's a human. So if it were not a human, we could respond with errors saying, please, you're not fooling us, bot. Maybe you'd want something a little more professional, but that's all we need to basically implement front-end, back-end, full-stack reCAPTCHA check and to keep those bots away from our forms. Hope you have a nice day. Take care. Bye.